Guys, so today I'm going to be doing a what I read in July video. I haven't made a video in a really long time, which I realize, but I've been watching a bunch of booktubers lately and I'm feeling a little bit inspired, so here we go. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that is the most awkward intro that I've ever done before, so I hope you liked that. So the first book that I read this month is Peony in Love by Lisa C. I have read a few other of her books before, and I guess I was just sort of in the mood for like an Asian setting and Asian protagonists because she is sort of known for writing books with especially like Chinese characters. And this one is actually based in ancient China. So this book, it's loosely based off of a sort of phenomenon that happened in the 1600s, which was centered around this opera named the Peony Pavilion. And basically what was happening was a bunch of these young girls became obsessed with this opera. And the opera was about like a lovesick maiden, essentially. So all these real girls were they started to imitate the characters in the opera, and they made themselves lovesick and actually starved themselves to death, which is very bizarre and it's hard to explain, but if you read this then you'll get it. So Peony is based off of one of those lovesick maidens, and she becomes obsessed with this opera, and she becomes lovesick for the man that she spots one night, and she starves herself and she dies. Now, this is where it becomes interesting, because after she dies, she becomes a ghost, and she cannot go on into the afterlife. She's stuck, essentially wandering the earth, and so she does that for a number of years. And so the story is just sort of about her wanderings throughout her old home as she looks in on her family and on the man that she fell in love with. And just sort of her, trials and attempts to keep going on in the afterlife, because there's a reason that she's being held back. So that was a very convoluted explanation, but I hope that kind of made sense, and I thought that it was very well written, so definitely give it a try. So the next book that I read is China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan. And the really annoying thing about this book, it was a good book, but about halfway through I realized that this is a sequel to Crazy Rich Asians, which was the first book, and I got so mad at myself because I hate it when I do that, but luckily the story is sort of isolated enough that it still made complete sense. So this sort of follows several different characters and storylines, but it's basically a satire of Asia's really rich families. And the main storyline is about, I guess it would be about Rachel. And she isn't rich, but she marries into one of these rich families. And then she discovers that her long-lost father is actually very rich as well. So that sort of throws everything into a tizzy, and she ends up going to Shanghai. And on the back here it says, suddenly Rachel is drawn into a dizzying world of Shanghai splendor, a world where people attend church in a penthouse, where exotic cars race down the boulevard, and where people aren't just crazy rich, they're China rich. So it is a satire, but it is a really enjoyable read, especially if you are Asian yourself and have maybe like Singaporean roots like I do. There are just a lot of like a bunch of Singaporean jargon and Chinese jargon, I guess, which I actually picked up on and found quite amusing. So I would... Okay, so now moving away from books with like Asian protagonists, which you gotta love, I have The Cellar by Minette Walters. Now this is a psychological thriller, and I haven't actually really read many thrillers before, but the little blurb for this sounded really interesting. Basically it is about a girl named Muna who is a slave, and she's being kept by this family of African immigrants in Britain, and they keep her locked up in a cellar, except one day the family's youngest son goes missing. very mysterious. And from this point onwards, she starts to gain a little bit of freedom because there are always police snooping around the house, and of course the parents don't want them to find out that Muna is a slave. So they have to pretend that she's their daughter. But Muna, even though she has had no formal education, is smarter than they think. And she has a secret plan, I'm trying not to give too much away, to sort of get a little bit of revenge, I guess. And I'm going to leave it there, but just know that it's not a very long book. It's actually quite thin, but it gets really intense, really fast, and there are a lot of plot twists, and they're just so sudden and really dark, and it definitely leaves you with a very creepy feeling at the end. So next I read Winter's Bone by Daniel Woodrell. I feel like the sort of hype around this book was a few years back, especially when Jennifer Lawrence started to become really famous because of the Hunger Games. But I was actually really into this book. The voice is so well written. The writing style is very unique. It reads almost like poetry. And what I really enjoyed about this is that all the characters, they speak in a particular way with a particular accent, and that accent is actually written into the dialogue, because sometimes books will be like, oh, he said this in a British accent, but then they won't actually necessarily spell each word as a direct way of how it would sound in real life. So this book is about a 16-year-old girl named Ree Dolly. And she is living basically in poverty with her sick mother and her two younger brothers, all of whom she has to take care of. The father goes missing one day, and this is a problem because if he doesn't show up for his court date, then the family will lose their house. So Ree makes it her duty to track down her father in time. So she sort of goes on this little adventure through all these small towns in the Ozarks, which it doesn't actually say what, I don't think it says what state it is. I think it might be Arkansas or Missouri. But she goes around looking for him. And the conclusion is quite intense, I guess. She's definitely got a lot of grit. In the front of the cover here, it says that she's sort of comparable to Maddie Ross in True Grit, if you guys have seen that movie. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's not a very long read, but it is a very interesting one, and like I said, it's written in a very unique way. So this is part of a trilogy, and it is called Ruby Red. It is by Kirsten Gier, and it was originally written in German, but this is obviously the English version. It's basically about a girl named Gwen, or Gwyneth, who lives in a family of time travelers. So all the female, not all the female, but certain females in that family will carry the time traveling gene. So everybody up until this point thinks that it's her cousin that has this gene. But one day, Gwyneth accidentally travels back into time, and they all realize that it's actually her. So suddenly she's drawn into this world of time traveling and of this secret society of time travelers. So this sort of just follows her different journeys back into time and her encounters with this mysterious count who founded this society. And she's not really sure what his motives are, because there is some sort of secret that's supposed to be unlocked once all the time travelers have given a bit of their blood to the, oh, what is it called again? I can't remember what it's called. The chronograph. That's the word for it. So nobody knows what this secret is, or at least nobody's telling her. So that's basically what it's about. The story, like the same story, does continue in the second book, which is called Sapphire Blue. So the thing about these books is that the story is very stretched out. So instead of each book sort of having its own isolated story, it just sort of continues right from where it left off. So in Sapphire Blue, it's really only set like a few days before, after this one starts. So she's just doing more time traveling, basically. and she's still trying to find out that secret. She's trying to find out why two of the time travelers, Lucy and Paul, stole one of the chronographs and are hiding in the past. That's basically what it's about. I haven't read the last book yet, so I don't really know how the story concludes or what the secret ends up being. Both of these books I found surprisingly enjoyable. They are very light reads, and I would suggest that they are written for a younger audience. I also didn't really enjoy the writing style. I found it again to be a little bit, sometimes it seemed a little bit choppy to me. Maybe that's just because it is an English translation, but I still enjoyed the idea of the story and I enjoyed the characters for the most part. And it's just sort of like a whimsical story a bit. And of course I love history, so I can't really say no to a time traveling story. Okay, so the last book that I finished this month, I do not have a hard copy of because it was an ebook. But it was Me Before You by, I think it was Jojo Moyes? I don't know how to say her last name. A lot of you have probably heard of it because they made a movie recently that came out around Valentine's Day and there were so many trailers around for it. It was a very cute book. So well, cute's not the right word actually. There were cute elements to it. The main character, Louisa, was definitely very cute, but the ending was very surprising. And the sort of overall deeper message of the story is very surprising because it wasn't hinted at all in the trailer, which was all I knew about the book before I read it. So basically the story is about a young woman named Louisa Clark who loses her job one day, and she agrees to take one up as a caretaker for a quadriplegic man named Will. And Will is not what she expects. First of all, he's a lot younger than she thought. He's also very arrogant and quite rude to her at times, but over time their relationship improves and she devises this whole plan on how to get him to enjoy life again because he is very depressed and bitter about his situation, where she's very like fun character and a very cheerful character. So she has this whole plan, so the book sort of follows her and her attempts to change the way he looks at life. I won't really talk too much about it more than that because I don't really want to spoil the ending, but the book does have themes surrounding euthanasia or mercy killing. So while I went into it thinking that it was just a very sort of sappy romance novel, it is actually a lot more than that, and I haven't really read many books talking about that issue. So it was definitely, I think, a very knowledgeable and also very enlightening book in some ways. So again, I would recommend it as well. So that is all that I read in the month of July. I actually surprised myself and read a lot more than I thought I would. I went sort of on this reading spree, which is, I haven't had that for a while now. But surprisingly, all the books that I read this month were actually quite good. Because usually I'm quite picky about what I read, but I enjoyed all of them at least to some degree, and I would recommend them all. If you guys have read any of these books or have some that you would like to recommend, definitely tell me about them in the comments. I would love to hear them, and make sure to subscribe. Thank you. Bye.